there. So today we are going to talk a little bit about how and why writers use dialogue in their writing. As you know, dialogue is anything spoken out loud in your writing, and it makes your writing so much more interesting. So here we've got two speech bubbles. What time should we meet? Let's meet at 5. If we are going to change this to dialogue, it'll look like this. What time should we meet? So the quotation marks act just like a speech bubble. It's all the words that are said. Let's meet at 5. So the quotation marks act just like speech bubbles. They wrap around the spoken words to show they're said out loud. Apologies for my cat. So the words spoken, the dialogue, or call it a quote. And then to let your reader know who's speaking, we use speaker or dialogue tags. He asked, she said. So reasons writers write dialogue. You can reveal character traits, feelings. Writers write dialogue to let the reader know who is talking, at what volume they're speaking, what they say, the actual words, and how they say it, and what tone. Are they moaning, babbling, howling? These details really help develop snapshots and scenes. It helps bring your reader into your writing, into the scenes. And you can use gestures, body language, reactions, mannerisms, tone of voice, facial expression, movement to reveal more about the situation and the character. So here's an example of dialogue, a scene with dialogue from Al Capone Does My Shirts by Jennifer Choldenko. So this character, Matthew, he goes by Moose. It's his first day at a new school. And his teacher has asked him what his name is. And he says, Matthew Flanagan, but everybody calls me Moose. I'm Miss Bimp, she says, looking at her roll sheet. Her pencil moves down the list. Excuse me, Mr. Flanagan, but I don't see your name here. Are you certain you have the right class? 7th grade advanced English? Yes, ma'am, I say. She squints at me. Big for 7th grade, aren't you, Mr. Flanagan? Yes, ma'am. So there's a lot to look at here. So there's no dialogue tag here where it says everybody calls me Moose, but we know he's speaking. I'm Miss Bimp. Your tag is she says, but Jennifer Choldenko also puts some actions to let you picture the scene a little bit. Her pencil moves down the list. Excuse me, and then she doesn't use a speech tag here, a dialogue tag here, and that's okay. We have it up here, and we have yes, ma'am, and then we've got the I say. There's your Moose's. It's in the first person in the book. And then we have a little action, a facial expression. She squints at me. Big for 7th grade, aren't you, Mr. Flanagan? So instead of the speech tag, you can put some expressions, a little actions. Yes, ma'am. So there's nothing here, but we know that it's Moose. Each time a new person speaks, you indent. It's essentially you're starting a new paragraph every time a new person speaks. So you can see Matthew, Miss Bimp, Matthew, Miss Bimp, Matthew. Here's another example of a scene with dialogue from Wilder Lore by Amanda Foody. And this has a quick back and forth, so I really wanted you to see an example of that. It had been fine for 2 years, all until the day that Selby showed up. He still cried and fled back home every chance he got, but Master Pilsman hadn't refused him, not once. It'll be dark soon, Selby whined to Barkley. So we've got our dialogue tag, and we also know how he's speaking. Not for hours, Barkley told him. It's freezing. It's winter. What'd you expect? I'm hungry. Didn't you eat lunch? I fed it to Gustav. So this quick back and forth, there are no dialogue tags, but she sets you up by who's talking first. Selby's whining. Barkley's annoyed and just telling him. And then you have to really keep track of the back and forth, which can sometimes be confusing. Again, each time a new character speaks, we're indenting. And just notice how the punctuation is on the inside of the quotation marks here. So there are 3 different types of dialogue tags. First is you can put it before the words. Christina said, comma, and then you write the word spoken. Melanie replied, comma. All right, notice capital letters. So the comma here is introducing what's being said, and the punctuation is inside the quotation mark, inside. So you can also choose to put the dialogue tag at the end. Call me tomorrow. So still all the words are inside the quotation mark. Your comma's inside the quotation mark. And then you've got the speaker tag, dialogue tag. Your comma is there. If you are using an exclamation point or a question mark, you don't use a comma. You actually put the exclamation or question mark, and then it's inside the quotation. And then you put your period at the end. Sometimes a dialogue tag is in the middle of 2 lines of quoted speech. Call me tomorrow. So uppercase, you start a quote with uppercase letter. All right, call me tomorrow, comma, because that's the words, and then it's introducing the speech tag, and have a nice evening. So this is the same speaker. You don't need to start a new paragraph. And okay, comma, quotation mark, Jay replied. So we've got our period here, and then the rest of what's being said. Sometimes you will want to interrupt the sentence that the speaker is saying. So this is, I don't know if you can see this, but it's blocked by my little recording, but I think it says, I wouldn't have forgotten the appointment if you reminded me in time. So notice how that's one long sentence, and this writer has decided to interrupt it with the speech tag. So I wouldn't have forgotten the appointment, comma. So put all of this in a quotation mark. She said, introduce the N. You don't need to use an uppercase because it's the same sentence, and then the rest is the same. I don't know why it's not progressing, but we're just going to move on. Okay, so to let your reader know that a character is speaking, you're going to indent every time a new character speaks. And I think on the Chromebook, it's Enter, not Tab. You start a quotation with a capital letter. Put all the words that a character says between quotation marks. Use dialogue capitalization and punctuation. The punctuation goes inside the quotation marks. Here's your exclamation point. And use speech tag unless it's a quick back and forth dialogue. So you will have a copy of this. So this the blue and yellow on the left just tells you what to do if you're going to use an exclamation point with the speech tag at the end. Right? Watch out, Carl shouted. Your exclamation point is here. Question mark is going to be there. If it's going to be a period, you use a comma. You don't put the period here. And then if you want to lead off with your speech tag, Carl shouted, you set it off, you introduce the quote with a comma, and then the end punctuation goes inside the quotation mark. And then this is from Winn-Dixie. I wanted you to have just an example of text. So Opal, said the preacher. He was lying on his stomach, and Winn-Dixie was sitting on top of him, panting and whining. So here, you don't start a new paragraph because it's still connected to the preacher. Then every other time, though, you do. Every time you start a new paragraph. And these are all your speech tag, but this one doesn't have one, but you don't need it, right? The preacher raised a hand. He rubbed his nose. Well, he said after a moment. So this is one of those examples. If you're splitting a sentence, you don't need to use an uppercase letter for it's. Well, it's a fear that goes way beyond normal fears. It's a fear you can't be talked out of or reasoned of. And then play with adding gestures, facial expressions, and actions to help your reader visualize the scenes. There are so many other words besides said. This, I know you can't read, it's too tiny. Maybe you can, my eyes aren't that good. So it's fun to play with. One rule of thumb, you could say, well, if I really want my reader to know how the character is saying it, like that's super important, I can use lots of different words. If I really want my reader to focus on the words, I can downplay how it's being said by just saying said. So you want to mix it up a little bit. So now you're going to practice. You're going to write a dialogue between at least two characters. Each character needs to say at least 2 lines of dialogue. You can use this image of these little penguins. What would they be saying? You can use your imagination, or you can use a dialogue scene from your story. Check your punctuation and capitalization and indent every time a new person speaks. And if you have a book handy, any book, chapter book that you have, a narrative book, fiction, nonfiction, you will have examples of how to punctuate dialogue right at your fingertips. Just open up a book and it will be there. All right, have fun with your dialogue practice.